The red, on-air, light flickered to life, glowing like a small sun above the camera. Applause rolled across the studio in practiced waves, warm and loud, the kind that made guests feel immortal, if only for a few minutes. Johnny Carson leaned back in his chair, perfectly composed, cue cards resting lightly on his desk. He had done this thousands of times, yet tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air that no one could quite explain, as if the room itself was holding its breath. And now, Johnny said, smiling at the camera, one of the most iconic men in American film. Actor, director, legend. Please welcome, Clint Eastwood. The applause doubled, then tripled. Clint Eastwood stepped out from behind the curtain, tall, unmistakable, his walk slower than it once had been, but still purposeful. The familiar squint, the sharp cheekbones, the aura of a man who had stared down the barrel of history and never blinked. He raised a hand to the crowd. A small smile appeared. For a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. But Johnny noticed it first. The hesitation. Just a fraction of a second too long before Clint took his seat. A subtle stiffness as he lowered himself into the chair opposite Johnny's desk. Clint adjusted his jacket, then pressed his fingers lightly against the armrest, as if grounding himself. Johnny leaned in slightly. "Clint, it's good to see you. It's been a while." Clint nodded. "Yeah, too long, Johnny." His voice was steady, calm, the voice of a man who had narrated decades of American grit. The band played softly, the applause faded, and the interview began. They talked about the early days, spaghetti westerns, long shoots under brutal suns, directors who shouted more than they listened. The audience laughed at Clint's dry humor, his pauses perfectly timed, his words economical as ever. But between the sentences, something else crept in. Clint blinked more often than usual. Once, mid-story, he stopped speaking entirely. Johnny waited. "So there I was in Spain," Clint continued after a beat, thinking I'd made a mistake. Johnny chuckled lightly. "That happens to all of us." Clint smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The cameras kept rolling. No one in the audience noticed yet, but the crew did. A stagehand near camera 2 whispered into his headset, "Is he okay?" From the control room, the producer leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Keep rolling." Johnny shifted his posture, angling his body just slightly toward Clint. Not enough for the audience to see, but enough for Clint to feel it. "You've directed so many films now," Johnny said gently. "When you look back, do you ever think about stopping?" The question hung in the air. Clint exhaled. "Every man thinks about stopping," he said. "The question is whether the world lets you." The audience murmured appreciatively. But then Clint's hand trembled. Just once. Small. Almost invisible. Johnny saw it. "So this might be your last time on the show," Johnny said, carefully. "How does that feel?" Clint's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 4. A cough rippled through the audience. Clint swallowed. "Feels heavier than I expected." The studio lights were hot. Always had been. But tonight, they seemed unbearable. Clint loosened his tie slightly, a gesture so unlike him that a few audience members leaned forward in curiosity. Johnny smiled, trying to keep things light. "Well, we won't let it get too heavy. We've still got time." Clint nodded again, but his gaze drifted, not to Johnny, not to the audience, but somewhere far away, past the cameras, past the studio walls. As if he were watching something no one else could see. "Clint," Johnny said quietly. Clint blinked. "Sorry. Just memories." Johnny chuckled. "That's what this chair does to people." The band played a soft sting. Laughter followed. Yet the laughter felt thinner now. Clint shifted in his seat. His breathing was shallow. One hand pressed flat against his thigh, fingers digging in as though he were anchoring himself to the present. Johnny made a decision. "Let's talk about something fun," he said. "Your kids. You once said they keep you honest." A genuine smile appeared on Clint's face this time. "They do. They don't care who you were on screen. They just want you to show up." The audience applauded softly. "And have you been showing up?" Johnny asked. Clint hesitated. "I try." His voice cracked, not dramatically, but enough. A ripple of unease spread through the room. The producer's voice crackled in Johnny's earpiece. "Wrap soon." Johnny nodded almost imperceptibly. "Well," Johnny said, "before we let you go, is there anything you'd like to say to the fans who've followed you all these years. Clint looked at Johnny, then at the audience, then at his own hands. I didn't expect to be here this long, Clint said. Most people don't. You think you're in control of your body, your strength, your time. And then one day, he stopped. The pause was different this time. Longer. Uncomfortable. Clint, Johnny said, his voice low. Clint tried to speak again. No sound came out. The smile vanished from his face. His eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in surprise. As if something inside him had suddenly slipped. Johnny stood halfway from his chair. The audience went silent. Clint reached out, fingers brushing the edge of Johnny's desk. And then, he slumped forward. The microphone clipped to his jacket scraped against the desk as his body shifted, weight collapsing inward. Johnny lunged to his feet, catching Clint by the shoulder just as gasps exploded through the audience. The band stopped playing. Cameras kept rolling. Cut to commercial. Someone shouted from the control room. But the red on-air light stayed on. Johnny held Clint, his face pale, his voice steady but urgent. Clint, can you hear me? The audience was frozen. No applause. No laughter. Just the sound of shallow breathing picked up by a live microphone. And somewhere backstage, footsteps began to run. The red on-air light finally went dark. For the first time in decades, The Tonight Show ended not with laughter or applause, but with panic. Studio doors burst open. Medics rushed in, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Johnny Carson knelt beside Clint Eastwood, one hand gripping Clint's shoulder, the other steadying his chest as if willpower alone could keep him upright. Easy, Clint, Johnny whispered. You're okay. Stay with me. Clint's eyes fluttered, unfocused. His lips moved, but only air came out. The audience sat frozen, no one stood, no one spoke. A woman in the third row covered her mouth, tears already forming. A man clutched his wife's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. They weren't watching a show anymore. They were watching a legend fall. Backstage, as Clint was lifted onto the stretcher, Johnny walked alongside him, ignoring the producer tugging at his sleeve. Johnny, you can't. I can, Johnny snapped quietly. And I am. The stretcher disappeared down the hallway, swallowed by swinging double doors marked authorized personnel only. The studio lights dimmed. The audience was gently ushered out, still silent, still stunned. Many would later say the same thing. It felt like watching time itself crack. The hospital, white walls, the rhythmic beep of machines, the smell of antiseptic. Johnny stood alone in the hallway, hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring at the floor. In all his years of television, wars, scandals, divorces, farewells, he had never felt this helpless. A doctor finally approached. Mr. Carson. Johnny looked up instantly. How is he? The doctor exhaled. He's stable. Exhaustion. Severe dehydration. Cardiac stress. Johnny closed his eyes. Is he? He's not dying, the doctor said gently. But he's been pushing himself far longer than he should have. Johnny nodded slowly. Can I see him? The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. The confession. Clint lay in the hospital bed, smaller somehow. The man who once filled movie screens now seemed almost fragile beneath thin blankets. His eyes opened as Johnny entered. Well, Clint rasped, hell of a way to end an interview. Johnny let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. You scared the life out of me. Guess I finally returned the favor, Clint said faintly. Johnny pulled a chair close. Why didn't you tell anyone? Clint stared at the ceiling. Because people stop listening when they think you're breaking. Johnny said nothing. I've known for a while, Clint continued. My body's been warning me. Missed beats. Dizzy spells. Memory slipping in places it never used to. Johnny's voice was low. Then why come on the show? Clint turned his head, eyes locking onto Johnny's. Because I needed to say goodbye while I was still, me. The words landed hard. Johnny swallowed. You don't owe anyone that. Clint smiled weakly. We owe more than we think. Silence stretched between them, heavy, honest. There's something else, Clint said. Johnny leaned in. What? I was scared, Clint admitted. Not of dying, of disappearing, of becoming a man people talk around instead of to. Johnny nodded slowly. That fear never really leaves. Clint's eyes softened. You get it. The tape. 2 days later, the network made a decision. They would air the interview. Not the collapse, but everything leading up to it. No music. No edits. No jokes added in post. Just truth. When the episode aired, millions watched. They saw Clint hesitate, blink, search for words. They heard the crack in his voice when he spoke about time, control, and showing up. And when the screen faded to black before the collapse, a simple message appeared. Clint Eastwood is recovering. This broadcast is presented as recorded. America sat quietly in their living rooms. For once, no one argued. The letter. A week later, Johnny received a letter. Handwritten. No assistant. No letterhead. Johnny, I don't remember everything from that night. But I remember you standing up before anyone told you to. That mattered. I've spent my life playing men who never fall. Funny thing is, falling is the most honest moment a man ever has. Thank you for letting me have mine in a room full of people who cared. Clint. Johnny folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He never spoke about it publicly. The final appearance. Clint never returned to late-night television. But months later, a short pre-recorded message aired during a tribute special. Clint sat on a porch. No makeup. No music. Just wind and sunlight. I used to think strength meant never stopping, Clint said. Turns out, strength is knowing when to sit down, and let the world keep moving. He paused, then added with a faint smile. Take care of yourselves. Don't wait for a spotlight to tell you when it's time. The screen faded out. Epilogue. Years later, people would still talk about that night. Not as a scandal, not as tragedy, but as something rarer. A moment when a legend didn't perform. He simply was. And the world, for once, was quiet enough to listen.